Today I'd like to share with you 2 tips on how to get a bumper crop of tomatoes well into the fall. For those of you who are new to the channel, my name is Linda and I'd like to welcome you to Veggy 360. Before we get started though, please hit the like button and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future videos. So jumping right in with tip number 1. Prune back your Determinate tomato plants to get a second big crop. I've been growing tomatoes now for over 40 years, but in the last 2 years or so, I've learned some very interesting tips on how to grow the best tomatoes well into the fall. I've always understood that Determinate tomatoes are a one and done type of crop. They grow to a set height, they produce in a relatively short amount of time, and then they're done, which really makes them very good if you want to can tomatoes. Well, last summer I learned something new. I manage the garden at the Pearson Cancer Center, where we have a series of raised beds and we try to grow as much as we can throughout the year. So we plant crops in the spring, summer, and fall. It's a very impressive garden, by the way. I've included a link to a video in the description below, a video on the Pearson Cancer Center that I recently uploaded, so check it out. Last summer we planted 2 types of Determinate tomatoes in one of the beds. The plants did great. Big yields, great looking tomatoes, and then all of a sudden blight hit, and all of a sudden production stopped, plants started to die, and we thought they were goners. Now the plan for that bed was to do spinach as a follow-on crop later on in the fall. But this was mid-August, so the temperatures were still in the 90s, so it was really too hot to plant those spinach plants unprotected. So we went ahead and planted them underneath the tomatoes. Well, one of the volunteers in the garden cut these tomatoes back, hoping to make them look better and possibly reinvigorating the plants. So look how well it worked. We didn't get much spinach, but boy, we sure got a lot of tomatoes in that bed. We harvested tomatoes right up until first frost. Look at how lush these plants are, loaded with tomatoes. This tip will also work for indeterminate tomatoes, which are the viney kind that will continue to grow until they're killed by the first frost. You can prune back some of those leggy branches that will encourage new growth and a new flush of tomatoes. Tip number 2. Certain leaf spot diseases can be treated to give your plants a second life. To do this, you first remove any diseased leaves. Next, cut back any dead or diseased stems. Third, you want to spray the plants. And on sprays, you have different options. You can do a copper sulfate, which is a good fungicide, or you can do neem oil, which has the benefit of being an insecticide and a fungicide, or you can do a baking soda or a hydrogen peroxide spray. Let me show you how well these sprays can work. Here are some dwarf tomatoes. The plants were loaded with fruit when early blight hit. The plant in the middle was hit particularly hard. As you can see, the leaves have turned brown, they've shriveled up. I basically thought this plant was going to die, but we decided to go ahead and spray the tomatoes in this bed with hydrogen peroxide and baking soda. After 4 weeks, look what the plants look like. Oh my goodness. New leaves, plants covered with blooms, and baby tomatoes. These plants have really bounced back. This is how well these sprays can work. These 2 tips will either bring new life to your tomatoes or buy just enough time for you to have those tomatoes ripen on the vines before the first frost. But the question is it worth it? Well, the answer is that depends. For non-fatal tomato issues, it can be, and I will get into fatal versus non-fatal in a bit. The questions you have to ask yourself are, number 1, how many days do you have left in your growing season? based on your first frost date, if you have at least 50 to 60 days left, and you have fruit already growing on the plants like this, then you're probably good. Now keep in mind the days are going to start getting shorter and temperature going to start getting lower, so ripening times will lengthen. But you can actually harvest the tomatoes once the color starts to blush, starts to change a little bit, and then harvest it, bring it inside to continue to ripen. You can also top the tomato branches by literally cutting the tips off. And what this does is it will encourage the plant to shift its energy from producing flowers over to ripening the plants, or ripening the fruits that are growing on the vines already. The next question to ask is, what type of tomato do you have? Cherry tomatoes will ripen much faster than your larger beefsteak type. Next, how far gone are the tomatoes? If you're late in the season and they're looking really bad, just pull them up. Final question, do you need that space in your garden for something else? For me, the focus of my channel is growing year-round in small spaces. So for me, real estate is very, very precious in this garden. So if the tomato doesn't have much hope, I'm going to pull it up and plant the next thing in its place, just so I'm maximizing the use of my space. Now these tips are good for non-fatal tomato issues. If your plants have certain types of wilts or tomato disease spots that are going to kill the plant fairly quickly, go ahead, get rid of them, pull them up. If the plant has root knot nematodes, and that's a subject for another video, that's my nemesis here, go ahead and pull those up as well. But make sure you dig up all of the remaining roots so that you're not leaving any root knot nematode larvae in the soil. Hopefully, if your plants are struggling, their issues are non-fatal, and you can follow these tips to revitalize your plants and get another nice crop of tomatoes late into the fall. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any future videos. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye now.